Imagine this. Your heart stops, the room goes silent, your body stops responding, and yet, for a brief moment, your brain may not be as quiet as scientists once believed. Some people who survive cardiac arrest describe something impossible to forget. They say they saw a bright light. They felt completely detached from their bodies. They experienced an overwhelming sense of peace. Some describe hearing conversations around them. Others report watching doctors perform CPR, as if they were looking down from above. But here's the part that makes this story truly strange. Scientists have actually recorded organized brain activity during cardiac arrest. So, what happens to consciousness during those final moments? And could the brain still be creating thoughts, even when the body appears completely lifeless? To understand that, we have to start with the moment the heart stops. When cardiac arrest occurs, the heart suddenly stops pumping blood effectively. Blood carrying oxygen can no longer circulate normally to the brain. Within seconds, a person loses consciousness. From the outside, it can look like everything has simply switched off. But the brain isn't a machine with one simple on and off button. Different systems shut down at different rates. And researchers are discovering that the process may be far more complicated than previously thought. In cardiac arrest studies, scientists have found that brain activity can sometimes persist or reappear during resuscitation. One of the most closely studied examples is the AWARE-2 study. Researchers monitored hundreds of patients experiencing cardiac arrest across multiple hospitals. They used EEG to monitor brain activity and devices to measure oxygen levels in the brain. Of 567 cardiac arrests studied, only 53 patients survived to hospital discharge. 28 of those survivors were able to complete detailed interviews, and 11 reported memories or perceptions suggesting some form of consciousness during cardiac arrest or resuscitation. That's not proof that consciousness survives death, but it is evidence that the boundary between unconsciousness and conscious experience may be much more complicated than we once assumed. And then, something even stranger appeared. During CPR, researchers recorded periods of EEG activity containing patterns associated with organized brain function. In some cases, these patterns appeared surprisingly late during resuscitation. The study reported periods of EEG activity consistent with consciousness emerging as long as 35 to 60 minutes into CPR. That doesn't mean someone was consciously thinking for an hour while clinically dead. It means that measurable brain activity can appear during prolonged resuscitation, and that some survivors later report experiences associated with that period. The exact relationship between the brain activity and the experiences is still unknown. And this creates a fascinating mystery. If the brain is severely deprived of normal blood flow, where could these experiences come from? One possibility is that the experiences are produced by the brain during periods when activity is returning, perhaps during CPR, or as the brain transitions into or out of unconsciousness. Another possibility involves the chaotic activity produced by extreme physiological stress. The brain may be attempting to construct a coherent experience, while its normal systems are breaking down. This could help explain why people sometimes describe intense imagery, strange perceptions, or a distorted sense of time. But there's another possibility, and this is where the scientific mystery becomes much deeper. What if consciousness is not completely understood? Some survivors insist they were conscious when their bodies appeared completely unresponsive. They describe seeing events around them, hearing voices, feeling separated from their bodies, and experiencing something they describe as more real than ordinary life. For some people, these experiences became deeply spiritual. They believe they briefly crossed a boundary between life and whatever comes after it. And that raises one of humanity's oldest questions. Could consciousness exist beyond the brain? Near-death experiences do not currently prove an afterlife, but scientists also haven't completely explained every aspect of them, and that's what makes them so fascinating. If future research were ever to demonstrate that conscious experience can occur independently of normal brain function, it would change our understanding of life and death forever. Maybe consciousness is entirely produced by the brain. Maybe the experiences happen during moments when the brain is recovering. Or perhaps there is something about consciousness we still don't understand, something that begins before we realize it and continues beyond the moment. We think it should end. For now, we don't have the final answer. But every person who survives the edge of death brings back another piece of the mystery. And there's another problem. People don't experience cardiac arrest like a stopwatch. When someone wakes up, they don't necessarily know exactly which second each memory occurred. A memory reported after resuscitation could come from before cardiac arrest, during CPR, or after circulation begins returning. Researchers therefore have to be extremely careful when connecting a remembered experience to a specific moment in the dying process. And this is one reason scientists still debate what near-death experiences actually represent. Yet the experiences themselves are remarkably powerful. Across different studies, people have reported recurring themes: a sense of peace, a feeling of leaving the body, bright or unusual visual experiences, hearing sounds, encountering people or figures, reviewing important moments from their lives, and sometimes a powerful feeling that they are moving towards something. Not everyone experiences these things, and the reported frequency varies considerably between studies, so there isn't one universal near-death experience. There isn't a single sequence that happens to everyone, and science has not established that these experiences prove an afterlife. But something else is clear. For many survivors, the experience can completely change the way they see life. Some report becoming less afraid of death. Others describe a greater appreciation for relationships or a stronger sense that their lives have meaning. These changes can persist long after the cardiac arrest itself. And that's where the mystery becomes even more interesting. Because perhaps the biggest question isn't, what do people see when they are dying? It's, how can the human brain create such a powerful experience while its normal function is being disrupted? We normally think of consciousness as something obvious. You're awake, so you're conscious. You're asleep, so you're not. But cardiac arrest reveals something much stranger. Consciousness may not disappear like a light being switched off. It may fade, fragment, change, and potentially re-emerge as the brain passes through different physiological states. Scientists are still trying to map exactly what happens, and new technology is making that possible. EEG can measure electrical activity. Brain oxygen monitors can track oxygenation. Researchers can synchronize these measurements with the timing of CPR. They can then compare the brain's activity with what survivors later remember. For the first time, we're beginning to get something that earlier generations never had: a window into the dying brain. But there is an important line we shouldn't cross. Brain activity is not automatically proof of conscious experience, and a near-death experience is not automatically proof of consciousness existing independently from the brain. Those are much bigger claims, and science has not settled them. What researchers have discovered is more subtle and arguably more fascinating. The brain may remain capable of organized activity during periods when a person appears completely unconscious, and some people later remember experiences from around that time. We still don't know exactly when those experiences occur, or exactly how the brain creates them. And perhaps that's the most unsettling part. For centuries, death was something humans could only imagine from the outside. Now, modern medicine can sometimes bring people back from the edge, and every successful resuscitation gives scientists another glimpse into a process that was once completely hidden. The final seconds of consciousness may not be a simple blackout. They may be a transition, a rapidly changing state, where perception, memory, emotion, and brain activity interact in ways we are only beginning to understand. And someday, we may discover that the last moments of consciousness are not the end of the brain story, but one of its most extraordinary chapters. Because the closer science gets to the boundary between life and death, the more complicated that boundary appears.